What's the worst case of rich kid syndrome you've seen? Story 1, I've posted this before, and I need to say first off the bat that this is about my best friend, and she is the best person I know. That is not normally a rich kid or anything. I was complaining about how I was short on money one month, just couldn't go out to eat, because I had to pay rent and pay for tag renewal all in the same paycheck. She looked at me, super seriously, and was like, "Don't worry, they send you those in the mail for free." After a long discussion, she learned that, in fact, her mom had been paying for her new tags every year. Story 2, I worked as a bouncer at a high-end nightclub. The biggest boner of a rich kid, straight out of Malibu's Most Wanted, gets a VIP booth and bottle service. Racks up a massive bill trying to act like a baller. His credit card gets denied, and he has to call his dad to come down at 1:30 a.m. because he can't order any more bottles. His dad comes down in his pajamas, obviously ashamed and furious at this jerk kid. Ends up embarrassing the crap out of his kid in front of his whole group of friends. He takes the kid's keys and is about to leave when his kid makes some crappy comment and goes back in the club. The dad's about to walk away after he apologizes for his son. When we offer to drag him out the rough way, he smiles and accepts. That kid hit every door and stepped on the way out. Not the best story, but was one of the most satisfying experiences working at that club. Story 3, don't know if it qualifies as rich kid syndrome, but when I got out of the Navy, I decided to use my GI Bill at one of the Penn State satellites. I was sitting in the cafeteria drinking coffee and typing up a paper when a girl sat down across from me and opened her backpack. She pulls out a sandwich bag and looks at it in disgust, then looks me dead in the eye and says, "I don't even know why I bother, my mother never cuts off the crust." I let out one of those high-pitched, short laughs like, "Is this girl for real?" Oblivious to the tone of it, she says, "I know right," then asks me if I want it. I looked around thinking I was getting pranked or something, because this crap is too stereotypical to be real, and I just assumed I was being filmed. She shook it at me and gave me a, "Well, look." So I took the sandwich. She then pulled out her student ID card and bought a crap ton of French fries. That sandwich was awesome. I think the bread was homemade and it was stacked like a dagwood. It had all kinds of expensive-looking meats and Dijon mustard, serious gourmet crap. I know this girl's mother will never see this, but I just want to say someone appreciated that sandwich. Story 4. This case isn't too bad and it's a bit funny. I became friends with a kid whose family was really well off. He was a really nice bloke, but a bit sheltered, and university was the first time he really had any independence, but he had very little sense of what the value of a dollar really was, since his folks got him what he usually wanted compared to what normal people would spend. There was one particular time he wanted us to eat at a restaurant, and he assured us it's really good. So we all rocked up to this place, and the price for main courses started at $40 to $60, which as poor uni students we couldn't afford. But when he realized this, he was so embarrassed he got his folks to pay for it. He's finally wised up a few years later once he got more independence away from his family and made his own money, and remains one of the best blokes I know. Story 5. Worked with this kid who was a good kid, but completely disconnected from financial reality for most people. He just moved out west from another state and was trying to get on like a normal adult. He went to buy a new car and was shocked that they couldn't just bill his dad for it, since they didn't know him. He ordered a bottle of wine at a restaurant, and the sommelier said, "Certainly, sir." Then the sommelier whispered, "Just for your knowledge, sir, the bottle is $700. He looked straight at him and asked, "Is that a lot?" The sommelier honestly didn't know how to answer. Good kid. And he got a lot better, but he just didn't know. Once he casually told his mom he needed some help with bills, and she deposited $20,000 into his account. Story 6, I work for a dentist, and her son is a spoiled brat. He was at the office one day because she had to bring him to an appointment later that day. He got bored and went out wandering around some of the local shops. He came back a little while later and without any preamble walked up to her and said, "Give me $80. She asked him what it was for, and he just repeated himself, and she gave it to him. So, the kid is 19 years old. He was 17 at the time of this incident. The father is in the picture, but my boss, the dentist, is the main breadwinner and disciplinarian of the family. The husband is more like another child and just works here and there and lives off her money. She tries to act tough and instill certain morals and values in her kids, but then turns around and caves to all of their demands. For example, her twin daughters are going to university next year, and instead of staying in a dorm, they demanded a two-bedroom, two-bathroom apartment. They refused to share a bedroom or even a bathroom. At first, she told them absolutely not, but they whined and complained, and she caved. This will be a two-bed, two-bath apartment in Toronto, by the way, where rent prices are through the roof. My boss is very much about appearances and, from a young age, got her kids accustomed to a privileged lifestyle. She created monsters. Story 7. This is pretty tame, but it's what I got. I used to work as an after-school babysitter for a loaded doctor couple with 2 kids. My job was mainly to pick up the younger kid from school and hang out till his parents got home. He was a good kid, but coddled and immature. He was in 5th or 6th grade at this point. Oftentimes, he would not be at his classroom when I came to get him, and the school campus was huge. Different buildings, courtyards, playgrounds, the works. If he wasn't at his classroom, I had to comb the whole campus, and he was rarely in the same place twice. He had a cell phone, but usually ignored its existence, except for playing games on it in the car. The school was in the city, and I had to park on the street. A couple of times I wound up with parking tickets because, despite having stuffed the meter with enough quarters to presumably result in ample time, the search for my charge would take much longer than anticipated. After a point, I mentioned this to him, calmly asking that he respect my time and stay in a set location so that I don't end up with a $25 ticket again. He looked at me with a good-natured shrug and said, "Well, that's not much. You can afford that. Sonny, your parents paid me $140 a week, and I was in college. I know you live in a $1.4 million house, and your dad buys you an expensive new toy every Sunday. But with the money they're forking over for your education, someone ought to have taught you the value of a dollar by now." But honestly, he was a nice kid. They moved away, and I hope he's doing well. Story 8. A friend of mine inherited a lot of money, enough to buy a house, and he spent it on 2 cars. A Subaru completely modded to Ken Block's version of it, and some BMW, both extremely expensive. We asked him a few months later why he didn't buy a house with it, because he still lived with his parents. So he told us that he already owned a penthouse. He just didn't want to move yet. Story 9. I could absolutely survive on my own. My parents just pay for my food and house, but I pay for everything else. If I got a job, I could pay for my food and house too. Said at 18, in the middle of a discussion between 2 middle-class peers who were talking about saving money because they had to pay for their own college and living expenses. About 5 minutes prior to this conversation, both peers had ordered the cheap dinner options and declined a shopping trip later that night, while the rich girl was talking nonstop about buying the best and most expensive souvenirs for her friends. Once tried working a regular person retail job and quit within a couple weeks as it just wasn't right and I didn't like it. Reed had actual responsibilities for the first time, moved cross-country for an 8-month education course, where her parents pay food, rent, and school. They also gave her a debit card, which replenishes up to $500 when it hits $50. She still posts Snapchats with captions of "that broke person life" over pictures of her getting Starbucks every day, and insists she could survive on her own. Constantly suggests the most expensive options for meals, activities, etc., and tacks on things like, "We can just split the bill. I know you're saving, but it's just amount at least $50. You'll be fine, right?" Then gets upset when people can't afford to spend time with her, or when someone dares to suggest that she helps cover costs. Story 10. My fiance's cousin. He managed to crash 4 cars while still in high school because his father would replace them. When he moved on to college, he got kicked out of several apartments for owning a dog when they weren't permitted. He told me he didn't care, though, since his father also funded his continuous stream of new housing. From what I last heard, his father is now paying for his long-standing cocaine habit. Story 11, I wouldn't say rich kid, but definitely spoiled brat who thought he was rich. Befriended him in 5th grade over our interest in the Yu-Gi-Oh! Trading card game. First time I hung out at his place, I noticed just how littered with stuff his room was. Some even unopened. I showed him some rare card that I had recently pulled from a pack. He got super jealous and angry that I wouldn't trade or sell it to him. He immediately got up and walked over to the family computer and booted up a site where you could buy cards and various other toys and such. Completely ignoring having me over, he's now on an online shopping spree, adding stuff to the cart. After adding a few things, he yells, "Where's the credit card?" And immediately his older sister comes running up the stairs to yell, "Kyle, Mom said no more buying stuff online," and closes the website and shuts off the computer. Kyle then proceeds to have a crying tantrum on the floor, and I'm just standing there over him in shock at what's happening and how he's acting. I slowly stopped hanging out with him, until completely avoiding him as his temperament got worse. Kid wasn't even rich either. If I remember correctly, both of his parents were cops. Story 12. Luckily, the only rich kids I knew were the most outstandingly well-behaved boys I've ever met. I was a youth leader in a ministry for middle schoolers, and I think the worst it ever got was them being mildly disruptive at times. But these kids had a literal half-sized basketball court in their basement, along with a basement the size of a comfortable two-bedroom apartment, an arcade, a fully stocked second fridge. Don't even get me started on the house itself and the yard. This place easily would list at least as $1 million home. But they would share with all the kids in the group and never ever look down on anyone for not having money like them. These boys even helped me change a flat tire on my car because they felt it was useful to know how. They literally could probably afford a tow truck and a tire repair all in the same day if it ever happened to them. They were so well grounded that it made me feel like I was the spoiled brat at times. Story 13. When I was a kid, I got bullied a lot by this one kid named Miguel growing up. His family was a lot better off and spoiled him, buying him the latest shoes, starter jackets, video games, etc. He was always showing it off and especially liked to rub it into my face. My parents both worked two jobs to try and provide a decent life for me growing up, but money was tight. Most of my clothes I either got from the thrift store or they were hand-me-downs from my older cousins. I remember one day my parents decided to treat me and take me to the Nike outlet and get a pair of brand new sneakers. This was the first pair of shoes I had in a long time that were all mine and never worn by anyone else. I remember being so excited to wear them to school and walking into the classroom with a big smile that day. Miguel takes one look at my shoes and says, "Nice new old shoes. I had a pair of those last year when they were cool." With a few words, he completely crushed the happiness high I was riding and brought me down instantly. Story 14. She got a new super expensive phone for Christmas, then got a new even more expensive phone for Valentine's Day. Gave the old one to one of her friends, constantly has super expensive items, and her dad drives her to school every day in his Lamborghini and is picked up in a limo. Super bratty and can't stand it when something doesn't go her way or when she isn't put in charge. Story 15. I work at a country club, and on the 4th of July, while I was working, a little girl asked why we were closing at 7 instead of staying open all night. I told her I wanted to get sparklers and fireworks with my family too. She thought about it, looked back at me, and said, But, but y'all aren't real people?" I just had to laugh and inform her I was indeed real, and all my coworkers weren't just the slaves of the country club. Wild man. Story 16. I hate to say this, but possibly my brother. My dad bought him a Mercedes-Benz as his first car. Within 2 years of owning it, my brother had had it broken into once, had the key snapped in half in the ignition, and flooded the engine at least once. He had no idea how to take care of it. My dad said it was probably the stupidest thing he'd ever done for my brother. Story 17. Less snobby and more just, phew. I had a friend whose family was ridiculously rich. She was so blind to just how lucky she was. She once left her limited edition Pikachu 2 seconds on a plane and was able to replace it and all the games she'd left behind too right away. Her biggest complaint was that she'd have to make up for all that lost gameplay. She just kept whining about it. She was living on her own in an apartment her parents paid for despite being thousands of miles away, and she ordered dinner from gourmet places every night. She took great care to detail for me exactly what she was having every night, complete with mms and yummies, so I'd understand just how good the food was. I was living in a college dorm at the time, in a town that was basically a food desert. Nothing delivered unless you wanted Papa John's, and the options for dining out besides the campus dining hall were Moe's and a few other places of similar quality. I'd been pretty content with these, besides missing stuff from home, obviously, until her luxurious lifestyle started to make me envious. She just couldn't help but flaunt her wealth all the time. I talked to her once about it, and at least she was kind enough to stop telling me every dinner, but everything else she said still reeked of how rich she was. Story 18. So I played football with a kid who believed he was God's gift to sport, and his parents supported that. The kid threw tantrums if the coach didn't start him or played him in a position he didn't want to play. This was pee-wee football, so like 9, 10 years old if I remember correctly. Everything I've heard about him since is that he's still a giant douche. He actually ended up playing hockey and getting drafted to the NHL, where he's been solid. He's had good opportunities and gotten lots of chances to play at a high level of hockey. He even does the whole, don't you know who I am a bit when he's back in town. Except no one does. He's a career AHL player and doesn't get much airtime in Canada. Story 19, a friend of my little brother, who was 11, 13. Best examples. I had just gifted my brother my old gaming PC, 3570K and 8 GB RAM with GTX 970 when I upgraded mine. My brother was excited and told his friend about it. A few weeks later, friend, I'm getting a brand new PC with two 1080 TIS and a VR headset and this and that. The kid plays pretty much only Minecraft. My brother also started getting heavily into airsoft. He saved up for months and months and bought one of the cheapest rifles there. He was ultra proud of it and loved it to bits. Not long later, friend says he's getting a full set of airsoft gear with a huge expensive gun and full tactical plate carriers, and all this expensive, useless to a 13-year-old for actually playing airsoft stuff. He's hardly my brother's friend anymore because that sort of thing is all he'd ever do. He got the PC, but I'm not sure if he got the airsoft stuff. Amusingly, he actually went to our airsoft field the other weekend for his birthday. Little brother rained a hail of BBs on the kid 24/7 and utterly destroyed him. It was hilarious. Story 20, knew this kid in college. Super rich, like Saudi Prince rich. Went to US school with loads of international students. He came into the lounge complaining that he was so hungry and all he wanted was mac and cheese. I told him I had a box if he wanted it. He looked at me like I had three heads. He asked, "What am I supposed to do? Cook it?" I rolled my eyes because this wasn't my first interaction with him. Gave him the box and showed him where the communal pots and spoons were. Said good luck and went to bed. He was a nice guy, just completely clueless and ignorant of anything outside his sphere. Story 21. A guy in my sister's year, 2 years below me, made fun of her on the first day of school because she had to wear the same pair of shoes as last year. Some of her friends found me and told me she was crying in the bathroom. Mind you, it was her first day of high school. Had the girls point him out to me in the cafe, and I went over and saw this dude was eating sushi, like some bamboo packaging and soy sauce. Flipped it into his lap and made a scene. Kid straight looked at me and said if I touched him, his mommy would sue my broke mom. I am a big guy. Always have been. I was 6, 2 inches, 210 pounds of hard muscle then. Pretty peaceful dude, though. I thought about what he had just said about both my sister and mom, and didn't stop till I got pulled off. Got suspended. Drove my sister to a nearby city and got her 2 pairs of shoes. Story 22. In college, I knew a guy who had his car shipped to school rather than just drive it up. At the end of the semester, I still had a ton of money left on my meal card, and it didn't roll over, so I had to spend it all. I was letting a couple friends who had already spent all theirs use my card for meals. I was hanging out with some people, and a kid asked to use my card. I didn't want to walk all the way to the dining hall, so I just gave it to him, thinking he would buy a couple things for himself. He spent all the money that was left on it. I think around $300 or $400. He literally filled up his car with everything he bought. I made him unload it all out of his car and into my room. It was mostly gross flavors of Powerade and protein bars. Story 23. This isn't someone I know personally, but my cousin's very good friend. My cousin and her whole family are pretty certain this girl bribed the person who did her road test. He literally did the parallel parking for her. There are lots of reports from my family on her crappy driving, but the thing that really takes the cake was her making a left-hand turn in her parents' giant truck, only to monster truck another car. Like she went on top of the car, her front wheel was in the window, while someone was in the car. The family got sued for $10,000 in damages and another $3,000 in emotional trauma. She got a Mercedes-Benz the next day. Story 24. I'd say my family is upper middle class, meaning that they drove regular cars, had a regular house, but sent me and my brother to private school because of education. My dad wanted the best for us, and I appreciate him putting it before himself. Anyway, I remember we were discussing in class what we did over the summer. Some girl was expressing how she and her family rented a house in Turks and Caicos and bragged about it all day. When it came to me, I just said, we went to Six Flags and spent a week or two while staying with our other side of the family in Michigan and had a lot of fun. She laughed at me and called me poor the entire year because she assumed my parents were too poor to take us on a crazy vacation. In high school, I went to a K-12. Her parents got her a brand new BMW. I got a regular Prius. I was more than happy. She made fun of me for driving that car and would post notes on my car saying a lot of rude stuff. She ended up totaling the car in the school parking lot by going into a pole. I assume her parents punished her and gave her an old beat up car. She came to school one day in a super old 1990 car and everyone called her a broke girl. She eventually left the school. I messaged her on Facebook back then and sent her a message about how important it is to be kind to others and not judge people based on wealth status. She only replied with, "Whatever car I drive, I can still enjoy my multi-million-dollar home while you live in a condo. Good luck with your life." About a year ago, she got in another car accident while drunk and severely injured the driver. She served jail time. I still laugh at her downfall and terrible attitude.